I chose to write this book about young men because they are the basis of fascism and have been since the inception of fascism. Fascism is appealing to young men because, unlike most other modern ideologies, it's not about fact. It's about action. It's about belief. It's about heart. It's about speed. It's about power. It's about violence. These are all virtues that fit very deeply and well in modern Western concepts of what it means to be a man. You cannot fight fascism just by doing your own small activities by yourself. You have to do it with other people. You have to work with other people to leverage the power that you have, the influence that you have, the resources that you have in order to help others and to help other people see what's going on, show up to protests, help people out. That's what it takes. You cannot do it by yourself because they are not doing it by themselves. They have many large organizations and people show up to their events. We got to do that too if we want to stop them.
Welcome to episode 242 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse Fascism works to unite all who can be united to join in mass, nonviolent protest and resistance in the streets and throughout society, growing to include millions and refusing to stop until we create such a profound political crisis that Trump cannot impose his fascist program or even maintain his hold on power. I want to thank our patrons, our sustainers who make the show possible. Join our community today for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com/refusefascism. Thanks to those sharing the show, everyone who buys our merch to support and spread the show. See the show notes to get your sticker packs and t-shirts. A special thank you to those who help the algorithms that help grow our audience by rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, rating on Spotify or their listening platform of choice. It boosts the show so much. After listening, please share your thoughts to help others find this resource. In today's show, we're sharing a conversation with Craig Johnson, host of the podcast 5 Minutes of Fascism and author of the new book, How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism. But first, this week in fascism. What the regime has done over the last week is breathtaking. They are moving at incredible speed and intensity, sending migrants to El Salvador's largest maximum security prison in the world, a torture camp run by a power-hungry fascist where people enter and never leave. Trump threatening to send Tesla vandals there, taking away legal representation from children at the border, dismantling the Department of Education, 48 people taken off the streets of Texas in an ICE raid with no disclosure of their identities, their whereabouts, or even which government agency is holding them, stripping more and more people, hundreds of thousands so far, of their legal status at a moment when even U.S. citizens are being detained overnight by ICE. Any and all of us can be disappeared by this regime. This is where we are at in the fascist timeline. This was a week where people who were still clinging to the institutions or the law will save us somehow were proven horribly wrong yet again. The window to stop this fascist nightmare is closing, but it is not yet closed. There are 2 points that need to be made about the time when it becomes too late to stand up. First off, at that point, the regime takes away any mechanism for redress, any avenues for dissent. Even ruling class opponents get locked up, while the rest of us get much worse. That's what happens when fascism is fully consolidated. Look at Turkey, where Erdogan just arrested the mayor of Istanbul, the most charismatic and popular face of his resistance in the run-up to their next election season. At that point, if you're not locked up, it becomes more and more difficult to protest, where thugs backed by the regime threaten and exercise violence with impunity, if not the regime itself doing the violence. But the second part of that closing window of time where you can really mount a mass resistance is that fascism gets to a point where people have capitulated to it, have made it part of their lives, have normalized it, have become collaborators with it, and that collaboration is accepted. We are already far too far down the line on both of those metrics. The conciliation and collaboration may be even more advanced than the repression at this point. As things stand, we are moving toward a fascist horror few can truly imagine. The most likely outcome is capitulation and the consolidation of fascism in the most powerful country in the world. But that is not the only possible future. The future is unwritten. We see that proven time and again in every instance of people rising up for justice, from the ousting of Tunisia's dictator Zine El Abidine Ben Ali and the Arab Spring that it inspired to the civil rights movement in this country. Consider this. What would it take? What awful things would this regime have to do for millions of people in this country to spontaneously erupt in protest and grind this to a halt? What would they have to do? And the longer it goes without people asserting themselves in the street with the demand that the fascist Trump regime must go, the easier all this gets normalized. But here's the thing. That's where you and I come in. Just because it won't happen totally on its own does not mean we are beyond moving people, even millions of people, into motion. This is a time where things can change. The impossible becomes possible. It is not true that the majority of the country wants this, even if a sizable minority does. It's still true that tens of millions of people are repulsed by everything Trump and MAGA represent. You have the legal community beginning to sound the alarm. You have some people of influence saying some really good things publicly. You have some people taking action, from the Tesla takedowns to the speaking up at town halls to the protesting when Trump comes to town, with protests against various parts of the nightmare ebbing and flowing. Imagine if all of those people were demanding that the fascist Trump regime must go. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The main thing to take away from this moment is that sometimes the very necessity we face, if people fully confront it, can open up freedom to act that didn't exist before. In Turkey, people have gone far down that road towards normalization, but when the mayor was arrested, people were ready and willing to take action. Members of the opposition who haven't been arrested are occupying government buildings, recognizing that the legal avenues of redress have been compromised. Hundreds of thousands are united, pouring into the streets. One of the biggest lessons from struggles for justice worldwide is that victory was rarely the predicted or likely outcome, but the knowledge of the atrocity that needed to be stopped compelled people to act, changing what was possible through their courage and conviction. Now, with the existential threat posed by the Trump regime, a group of people acting with conviction, moving heaven and earth to oust this regime, could actually change the course of history. And if there's even a chance to stop this regime that imperils humanity and the planet itself, I, for one, believe it's worth throwing everything into. In the United States, however, the loyal opposition, the leaders of the Democratic Party, are telling people not to go into the streets, to trust the courts, even as Trump is frontally assaulting the legitimacy of those courts. But in Turkey, it is Erdogan himself, left politically isolated, trying to funnel opposition into the courts because the people are exercising their power in the streets. There is a basis for stopping this horror, and a key ingredient is recognizing just how bad it is so that we can act accordingly. Imagine what could be accomplished if people here, even an influential minority, gave up the illusions that the guardrails of democracy might hold, that someone else will do it for them. Imagine if we started acting on that. Look, it's clear. Trump is taking his attack on the rule of law to a whole new level. He has berated the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, demanding he stop federal judges from issuing nationwide injunctions. He issued an executive order censuring lawyers for obstructing his orders, meaning doing their jobs. He used the power of the president to target the prominent law firm Perkins Coie, which has represented his political enemies and has argued against his actions, including his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, categorically revoking their security clearances needed for working on sensitive cases, restricting some of their lawyers from even entering federal courts. He rescinded attacks on another firm, Paul Weiss, only after they agreed to provide $40 million worth of free work for the administration's agenda. Yes, collaborating with the fascist regime. And I have to give a shout out here to Marc Elias, who was personally targeted by Trump on Friday in a White House memo that really escalated the administration's attack on lawyers and the rule of law. And here is Marc Elias, the chair of the Elias Law Group, statement in response. Quote, President Trump is attempting to dismantle the Constitution and attack the rule of law in his obsessive pursuit of retribution against his political opponents. Today's White House memo targets not only me and my law firm, but every attorney and law firm who dares to challenge his assault on the rule of law. President Trump's goal is clear. He wants lawyers and law firms to capitulate and cower until there is no one left to oppose his administration in court. Elias Law Group will not be deterred from fighting for democracy in court. There will be no negotiation with this White House about the clients we represent or the lawsuits we bring on their behalf. Our democracy is in peril, and the decisions made by lawyers and their firms may very well determine the future of the rule of law in the United States. End quote. We want to commend Marc Elias and his law group. We want to express support for them, and we need to be in a situation where lawyers are defending each other and where we're defending them. And there's a dynamic of the best defense being the opposition in the streets, flooding the streets, demanding the removal of the regime. And many, many more people need to be following the model that Marc Elias and his law group are demonstrating right now. Also want to shout out and highlight the now viral actions of Rachel Cohen and an associate at another large firm, Skate and Arp, Slate, Megger and Flom. On Thursday night, Cohen fired off an email to her firm that said she was giving her 2 weeks notice, that she would revoke if leaders agreed to a number of conditions, basically that they would stand up to the Trump administration, including by refusing to cooperate with the targeting of DEI programs. She wrote, quote, "We do not have time. It is now or it is never. And if it is never, I will not continue to work here," end quote. When talking to NBC about her decision and why she did that, she said, quote, "Is this going to be unhelpful to the aim that I am working towards, which is the protection of not just my colleagues, but the rule of law in the United States of America, because the stakes really are that high," end quote. She went on to say, quote, "We are in this moment where the president is testing what he can get away with and whether the structures that we have in this country that are supposed to prevent us from having a dictator will hold. We are not the first or the biggest line of defense. The big law firms are not going to save us, but we are a brick in a wall, and we're pretty close to the bottom," end quote. This should be a time, as I said, when lawyers are banding together, universities are banding together, scientists are banding together, artists are banding together. Everyone under attack, and those not targeted yet, are coming together and saying, hell no, Trump must go. The fascist Department of Justice has repeatedly insisted judges who present reasonable obstacles to their efforts be removed from their cases. Trump singled out Judge Boasberg, who is admirably pursuing the truth about the situation of Venezuelans sent to El Salvador for torture and the truth about exactly how and why the administration defied his clear orders. Trump's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act is a direct affront to the rule of law, redefining war in order to strip human beings of due process. And in Mahmoud Khalil's case, Trump and Rubio have stretched an obscure provision in a McCarthy-era law to the point where anyone they deem politically inconvenient can simply be grabbed off the street, thrown into ICE detention halfway across the country, and potentially deported or even disappeared. The case of Mahmoud Khalil runs through many of the extraordinary events that happened this past week. First off, the Trump administration explicitly admitted to colluding with the Israeli government to break the ceasefire in Gaza, killing hundreds in their first night of unprovoked bombings and proceeding to murder many more in the days since. It would be a wild coincidence for the U.S. government to very publicly kidnap a prominent leader of the movement to stop the genocide just days before that genocide went back into high gear. Meanwhile, Mahmoud's case, the case of a recently graduated student leader being ripped away from his family for his protected political speech and actions, intersects with Trump's massive transformation of American education, which took a huge leap this week with the dissolution of the Department of Education. This will have huge repercussions from pre-K through postdoc education and to society at large, putting oppressed groups and people with disabilities in direct, immediate danger, threatening to deprive poor Americans of basic necessities like school lunch, transportation, and other services, stripping both individuals and whole institutions of their rights to defy the fascist actions or even question the government and its America First fascist worldview. Just look at Columbia University's groveling acceptance of Trump's insane demands. Former Washington State Governor Jay Inslee put it succinctly in talking about these elite university presidents. He made the point on Ali Velsh's show that if you're stranded on a desert island and you're silent about fascist takeover, you aren't a collaborator. But if you're the president of Harvard and you're silent, then you are a collaborator. But it's not only education, and it's not only Palestine. Mahmoud's detention also previews the moves Trump is making to, in the words of a New York Times headline from this past Wednesday, quote unquote, cripple the left. The New York Times article from Kenneth P. Vogel and Shane Goldmacher astutely describes both the ominous actions taken so far to target, quote, the financial, digital, and legal machinery that powers the Democratic Party and much of the progressive political world, end quote, as well as the work being done within the administration to take these efforts to the next level. Meanwhile, Mahmoud's case is proving to represent a wide-scale effort to strip immigrants and even visitors of their clearly defined rights, with the similar kidnapping of Badr Khan Suri, the weeks-long detention of Jasmine Mooney and Becky Burke, the revocation of visas and denial of entry to members of the British punk band The Subs, and a French scientist who criticized Trump, with the aforementioned 48 people disappeared from the streets of Texas, and most ominously, with the fascists in power stripping 238 people from Venezuela of all due process and sending them to a notorious prison in El Salvador run by the fascist Nayib Bukele. This cannot stand. Mahmoud's case runs through all of these diverse efforts by the fascist Trump regime to consolidate their power. He must be freed, and the fascist regime behind these nightmares must be driven from office. With that, we want to share 2 clips of commentary from Elie Mystal, justice correspondent for The Nation, speaking on Democracy Now! On Wednesday, March 19th, on Trump's lawlessness, attacks on the judiciary, and the fascist dictatorship we face. He also gets into why we can't rely on the courts to stop fascism and why the people have to take the lead. Have a listen.
We live in a fascist dictatorship. That's what's happening right now. That's what it feels like. This is where we are. There's not a coming constitutional crisis. We are in the constitutional crisis right now. Because what do we have? How can we call ourselves a democracy? How can we call ourselves a nation of laws if one man and one man alone, Donald Trump, is able to defy the other 2 branches of government? And that's what we have here. And that's what Trump is promised to do, and that's what he is, in fact, doing. Amy, you played the clip. You mentioned John Roberts' statement, and you rightly pointed out that it is rare for John Roberts to say anything at all. But let's look at what the man said, and let's look at what the man didn't say, right? It was one of the weakest statements that he could have possibly made. He's running around with his, clutching his pearls over like, don't impeach federal judges. That's wrong. He didn't say nothing about actually following the orders given by those federal judges that Roberts doesn't want impeached, right? He didn't say anything about Trump's blatant violation of multiple federal court orders. He didn't say anything about that at all. So again, Roberts is not your friend. Roberts is not the one coming to help us. He's as afraid as I believe that Roberts is as afraid of Trump as the rest of the government is. And that's, again, I don't know any definition of fascist dictatorship other than the one we are all experiencing right now. People have told me from the jump, from November 5th when he was elected, that the courts would save us, that the courts would restrain him, that the courts would be the final guardrail preventing his military dictatorship. And I have said from the jump that the courts will not save us, that they cannot save us because they cannot enforce their own decisions. The executive enforces the court's decisions. And if you have an executive like Trump who is willing to ignore court orders, then there's nothing courts can do. So part of my question, Amy, is to turn it around back on the other people who were telling me for months that the courts would save us. What do y'all got now? What's your plan now? Now that the courts have issued their order and Trump has ignored their orders, what's plan B? Because plan A was the courts saving us, and that was never going to work. My response to Trump violating a court order, violating multiple court orders, is the people have to lead because the courts will not do it. The courts cannot do it. You want to free Khalil? We need to go to Jeddah and free Khalil. Like, that's what it takes. It's not going to happen because a judge writes something down on a piece of paper. Trump is just going to ignore it. And we saw that with the Venezuelans that he deported illegally after a court told him to turn the plane around. And we saw it with the doctor who we deported what he said too quickly for the courts to rule at all. And again, I'll turn it back on John Roberts, who didn't say boo about that, right? Had all the smoke for like, oh, don't impeach my judges. Didn't say boo about Trump refusing to turn the planes around under a direct court order to do so. This is the fascism we are living under. This is what it feels like, folks.
March 27th is the date set for Mahmoud Khalil's first federal court hearing after being kidnapped by Trump's fascist Homeland Security ICE thugs in the dark of the night. Join Refuse Fascism at protests around the country, including Newark, New Jersey's U.S. Courthouse at 11 a.m., Columbia University in New York City at 12 p.m., join in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Courthouse at 11 a.m. For more locations, visit refusefascism.org. These protests will demand free Mahmoud Khalil, stop the fascist attacks on the rights to free speech, dissent, and the rule of law, stop the demonization, abduction, and deportation of all immigrants and refugees. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The fascist Trump regime must go. Again, see the full list of locations and times at refusefascism.org, along with materials like posters and flyers to distribute. And save the date, April 5th, we will be joining hands-off protests organized by Indivisible and other groups. We'll be bringing the demand, the fascist Trump regime must go, along with our slogan, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. We'll have more details soon, but East Coast folks, plan on joining me and the Refuse Fascism crew in DC. Stay tuned to our social media and website for more. With that, here is my interview with Craig Johnson. Today, I am glad to be welcoming on Craig Johnson. Craig is the author of a new book, How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism. And Craig is the host of 15 Minutes of Fascism. So glad to welcome you on, Craig. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Sam.
There's absolutely nothing to talk about regarding the fascist threat. It's been a really slow week so far. So I guess we can just talk about pets and TV shows.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. My research has never been relevant in the real world. I am simply an antiquarian calculating and cataloging old weird things that weird people did in the past.
Yeah, completely. I wish that was so true, right? I'm sure you do too.
I say that all the time. I say that constantly. So I started my PhD in 2014, and I knew that there was going to be a Republican president in 2016. I mean, I saw the writing on the wall then. I was not prepared for things to move this fast, I would say. But there were signs even back then.
Tell me a little bit more about that. I definitely agree with the signs for several decades now indicating this fascist direction. Can you talk to me a little bit more about what you mean by the speed, how quickly you see things developing?
Yeah, just a quick rundown on, some of these indicators about why the right wing is doing so well, not just in the United States, but globally. There are two big ones. The first one, in my opinion, the more important one, is that the right wing has been doing a lot better about organizing in a holistic project than the left or progressives have for the last several decades. Especially in the United States, there is no progressive party, whereas the Republican Party has been becoming more of a right-wing party since the 1970s, increasing in the 80s with Reagan, increasing even further with W. Bush in the 2000s. That trend has only continued. Donald Trump is in many ways the fruition of a 50-year-long project. Whereas with the Democrats, there was acquiescence with Republican projects in the 1990s. And aside from certain extremely laudable victories, particularly on queer rights, the Democrats have not had a socially transformative vision about the United States since then. And so lacking one, they were unable to produce the kind of holistic movement that the Republicans have. And that's where we are. And I think that that's largely the case in many other countries as well. For example, the Labour Party in the United Kingdom is another paradigmatic example of this. But the other major reason that right now is pretty ripe for fascist growth, not just in the United States, but in the world, is that while the Western economies of the world have been growing significantly, in terms of people's everyday lives, while they have been improving, they have not been improving at the rate at which people expect improvement. And so many people who were in the middle class, families who were in the middle class in the 60s, 70s, and 80s are no longer, or what the middle class is has changed. And this is especially important when it comes to younger generations. When younger generations look into the past and see their parents having done relatively better than they're going to do, that's a perfect opportunity for fascism, especially when it comes to young men.
I do want to talk about some recent developments, but before I do, I want to talk about some of the themes in your book and why, as you just mentioned, the targeting of young men. I just want to start with what led you to write this book and what, in your mind, makes these conversations so urgent right now.
Yeah, I wanted to write this book because I studied fascism for a living when I was getting my PhD and afterwards as an independent scholar and researcher. But I wanted to do so in a useful way. I wanted to share that information with people. Coming out of a PhD program, after writing your dissertation, you basically have a choice. Do you turn your dissertation into a book that a couple people might read? Or do you try to write something that might be more useful to people? That's why I wrote this book. I wanted it to be readable by everyday people who are concerned about fascism or worried about it. These conversations are vital right now because, as you know, we were joking about it earlier, but it's because fascism is here. The United States is currently ruled by an administration that, whether or not Donald Trump is a fascist is still like a debatable question potentially, but whatever. That's not really important. The point is that there are fascists in the administration. Fascism is participating in the governance of the United States. And so we need to talk about it now, essentially because we weren't talking about it 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that you could speak to this better than I could, but the whole lesson that we get, unfortunately, time and time again with fascist regimes or slightly fascist adjacent regimes is that once power consolidates, there's a time where it becomes too late for the decent people to do something about it. It then runs roughshod over the lives of people in the country that it has hold and has implications in a country like this for the whole world. All species, in fact, and the future of continuing life on this planet. So the stakes are, to make the understatement of the century, incredibly high. I think that your point about writing something that people could use in this time is precious. I think that it struck me that you focused on sons. There's been other works. I think of the Stephen Eisenman book that was co-authored with the illustrator, the most brilliant artist, Sue Ko. It was like a young people's illustrated guide to fascism that is geared for like college smarty high school students, maybe explaining fascism and what it means and how to fight against it in terms of not like a practical guy, like this is what you do, but understanding how it works so that you can fight against it politically, to be clear. It made me think you were identifying, I think, a certain trend that we're seeing this time in particular with Trump 2.0 around the targeting, the recruitment, and the susceptibility of young men to be key drivers of fascism, but also key in terms of easily recruitable forces. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Why is there such a strong base right now of fascist young men? And from there, like, what are the fascists then doing to recruit them is secondary to like, why is this such a social base to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, that's the central question, right? I chose to write this book about young men because they are, more than women, non-binary children, they are the basis of fascism and have been since the inception of fascism, at this point over 100 years ago. The founding of the Italian Fascist Party is in the early 1920s. The answer that I usually give about this is that fascism appeals to young men, and I mean that in both senses. Fascism intentionally seeks out young men to recruit them, and fascism is appealing to young men. Fascism is appealing to young men because, unlike most other modern ideologies, it's not about fact, it's about truth, it's about action, it's about belief, it's about heart, it's about speed, it's about power, it's about violence. These are all virtues that fit very deeply and well in modern Western concepts of what it means to be a man. And so it appeals to young men. It fits directly into their worldview, their thoughts about the world, how they're taught to see the world, how they're taught to operate in the world. But fascism also directly appeals to young men, like on purpose, intentionally. And that's because they need young men in order to go out and do dangerous, violent stuff in order to get the stuff that they want. most of the time, most fascist groups that end up participating in government don't take over the government. Most of the time, they are shock troops. They put on ski masks and harass people. They stop people from voting. They break up opposition political party offices. They conduct clandestine assassinations. They do small stuff, things that the state doesn't want the police or the army to be seen to do. That, they have a little bit of a protective distance away from it. That's what fascists are for, primarily. And you need young men who are willing to take those risks to do it. Fascism needs them. So that's what it is. Fascism appeals to young men, and it's appealing to young men.
And I think that we can see examples now of how I would call toxic masculinity, others might call it hypermasculinity, misogyny, and male supremacy have become shapers of whole social media platforms, whole brands, basically, that it's become an appealing brand. You see it in the Andrew Tates, but it's also so much more. I'm wondering, when you have that in the culture, in addition to being in the seat of power, the policies that are male supremacist and misogynistic, the fact that Trump is Trump, a proud misogynist, that Vance is Vance, a proud male supremacist. So you have that in the politics, but you also have that in the culture. I'm wondering how the mainstreaming of what a few years ago even would be so far past the pale, how that impacts the young men, but also the ability for others in the lives of young men to pull them away from this movement.
That's an extremely good point. The masculine nature of fascism isn't particularly new, but in the present, it's taken on this particular form. Male supremacism, hypermasculinity, toxic masculinity. These are all extremely important, useful descriptors for what's going on here. You're absolutely correct to identify Andrew Tate as maybe like a paradigmatic example here, but yeah, he's not the only one, right? Basically, whatever of the big podcasts you listen to, there's probably some bros there bantering with each other, and they're engaging in what Donald Trump in his first presidential race called locker room talk. That's what these people are tuning in to listen to. The reason that is so prevalent right now is it's an intentional political project that was engaged in by a lot of online influencers whom I will not name here, primarily because I don't want to give them additional airtime, but they are gone into a little bit further in my book and other works that it references. But it was an intentional project on their part because they knew about the gendered nature of fascism. These people, the ones who are running the propaganda machine, they're not fools. They know exactly what they're doing. They're doing it on purpose, clear-eyed, and they know it works, and they're very, very good at it. They're winning. They're being extremely successful at what they're trying to do, right? Which is, as you said, to make the kind of language, not just about gender and sex, but also about race, about immigration status, about religion, kind of language that would be beyond the pale even in the 90s, to bring it back into how everyday people and politicians talk.
As you were talking, I was thinking about how overall the fascist project is one of revenge and vengeance, right? And I think that, when it comes to looking at young men and the lies that they are told about why they don't have what they have and who's to blame, and that there's the constant degradation of the other, you're suffering because of them. And in this case, you have a situation where the role of women did change dramatically in this society. I am not at all saying that we have achieved equality or equity or any of those things, but the role of women in this society has changed dramatically over the past 50 years. And this is something that is intolerable to those who want control. Then it's used as a source of blame for why you don't have the life that you have, young men, is because of these women out there. I just think that this extends, of course, to other sections of society that are oppressed and targeted as well by this regime. I just think that understanding the revanchism that's driving this movement is helpful. Understanding what they're going for and what they're willing to do in order to get that. I wanted to get your thoughts a little bit more about why you decide to really put the lens on fascism and say it. There's a lot of people who continue in 2025 to still revert to euphemism, extremism, far right. You've decided to name it. And I'm wondering, how do you break that down to people? And why do you think that that's a necessary thing to do?
Yeah, that's a really important question to me as somebody who straddles the line between academia and advocacy. In my academic world, like when I'm putting on my academic hat, I might say like, okay, well, we might debate whether or not Donald Trump meets the definition of fascism because, he doesn't have a mass political organization or something like that, or because he doesn't have the particular kind of transformative vision that fascism is characterized by, whatever. But when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to like, if I'm talking to somebody at a bus stop, I don't want them to come away from the conversation being like, oh, whew, turns out my son isn't a fascist. He's just like deeply involved in reactionary, revanchist neoconservatism. Thank goodness. That's not encouraging. We don't want people to be relieved by the fact that it doesn't meet all the definitions of fascism. When it comes to operating in the world, when it comes to thinking about the dangers that it poses, I mean, Donald Trump has been quacking like a duck for several years at this point, so I'm perfectly fine using the term when it comes to everyday political discourse. In 30 years, when people are writing their retrospective history books, we'll debate about it, and I think that there's academic value in that debate. But when it comes to like actually living and deciding what you want to do with your time, yeah, I mean, call it like it is. That's my opinion.
And then looking at the way things are going, whether or not we can have these conversations in 30 years about what Trump was depends upon what we do now. So I think really getting people to understand what it means when it's fully imposed, the it being fascism, walking people through like what it means when there are not civil and democratic rights, I think is really important right now. I tend to think that most people see the end of fascism and not the steps that led up to that end. For instance, in Germany, they see the death camps, but not the steps that led up to them. And so I'm not sure if you have any thoughts now on what people who do see the danger, how you think people can be bringing to the people in their lives, whether it be their sons or not, how you break down the fascist danger in this moment. Yeah,
you're right. I think that most folks, especially in the United States, but I think that this holds true in a lot of the rest of the Western world as well, they don't know, and I think that this is a problem with education, they don't know how it happens. They think about fascism as something that happens to a country, as opposed to something that a population does to itself on purpose. There's this belief that fascism like descends like some sort of disease or cloud, and like it afflicts people. We even use this language when people talk about fascism, when people talk about fascist governments, as opposed to like, no, I mean, like in most modern Western societies, somewhere around 30% of people just like it. They just want it. They want authoritarianism. They are racist. They are sexist. That just seems to be the case. So that's one part of it that I think a lot of people need some help with education on, that like this isn't something that comes from the top down. It comes from the bottom up. Trump is doing these things because a lot of people like them. That's why he's doing them. That's one of the more important things to tell people. The second one is that, as you said, if you're trying to walk someone through the process, this is not good news. It's not heartening news, but just to remind people that this is not a short process. Ending what Trump has done already in less than 2 months, that's going to take 2 years. If he's got 4 years, it'll take decades to undo what he could do. And that's at a minimum. We are in for the long haul here. And so the big lesson is that we can't do it alone. You cannot fight fascism just by doing your own small activities by yourself. You have to do it with other people. You have to work with other people. That doesn't mean necessarily joining a political party. It doesn't mean starting a nonprofit. It doesn't have to mean those things. It means being in a community, part of the communities that you're already in, a church, a PTA, a block club, whatever it is. You need to work with those people to do what you can. A, to keep them and their loved ones out of fascism, and B, to leverage the power that you have, the influence that you have, the resources that you have, in order to help others and to help other people see what's going on, show up to protests, help people out. That's what it takes. You cannot do it by yourself because they are not doing it by themselves. They have many large organizations and people show up to their events. We got to do that too if we want to stop them.
I think that that's such an important point, Craig, that they aren't doing it alone and we can't either. And I think that the truth is, and we often forget it, I know I forget it sometimes, to be honest, that while this country is fucking full of fascists, the non-fascist bloc is still the majority. And I think that if that bloc, in all its diversity of political backgrounds, identities, locale, if that force was to assert itself on the political stage, it would be tens of millions of people, and it would be a force to be reckoned with. And I think that oftentimes we sit alone in our smallness of what can we do on our own. And on our own, in and of ourselves, we can't do much, but together we can change the course of history. And I think that that's a really important reminder about what's possible when we come together. I did want to ask your thoughts on what I see as a real turning point, the kidnapping or abduction of Mahmoud Khalil.
I agree that that is a major turning point here.
I really think that it's a leap toward what would make this a different kind of country, a fascist America. The rule of law being moot, when what's permissible to speak or do is at the say-so of Trump and his thugs. I think that needs to be the point, the line where it's a wake-up call for us to act. One of the things that Refuse Fascism has been saying is that when the business of the government is bulldozing the rule of law and cementing a fascist order, there must be no business as usual. And I wanted to get your thoughts on how you're seeing Mahmoud's arrest and threatened deportation and why people who are concerned about fascism, regardless of their thoughts on what I think is the righteous struggle for Palestinian liberation, whatever your thoughts on that are, why this should be of grave concern to folks.
As you said, if we're going to claim that the United States is a liberal democracy, that would necessarily mean that the United States is a country of laws and that it functions according to its laws, one of which is the Constitution. And in the Constitution, there's a thing called the 14th Amendment, which says that no person shall be denied the rights and protections afforded by the United States law if they are present in the United States. Mahmoud Khalil was a legal immigrant to the United States. He followed every single rule. He broke no law. He was accused of breaking no laws. He had a valid green card, and yet he is facing deportation, was kidnapped by plainclothes officers from his home because he said something that the government disagreed with. And there are people who disagree with what Mahmoud Khalil was saying, who nevertheless are ringing the alarm bell and saying like, hey, this is a partisan deportation. The reason that the Trump administration started with somebody like Khalil is twofold, or threefold at least. One is that he is a person of color. Two is that he is a student. And three is that he's a Palestinian rights activist. This made him a perfect test balloon for Trump's using the kinds of powers that he has been consolidating for the last couple months, and with the legal groundwork for arguments for consolidating those powers having been laid since his departure from the White House in 2020, there's a reason that Khalil was chosen for this. As I continuously try to argue, these people are not stupid, they are not haphazard, they have a plan. Khalil is part of that plan. In order to be able to make all activists afraid, Donald Trump and his administration are starting with people that many people in the United States dislike already. That's why they have chosen him as a target. After Khalil, they will go after other people as necessary. However, many other nonprofit organizations, many other political organizations they're bending the knee in advance. Universities are eliminating posts. They're denying people tenure because they don't want to be targeted in the way that Columbia University is being targeted.
Thanks for that clarity. And I think that there's this point of like, on one level that there's going to be anticipatory obedience. That there's going to be people who, to save their skin, or because they believe it will save their skin, comply in advance. I think that it is, to me, still not surprising, but it still shakes me to the degree in which universities are working to collaborate with the fascist dictates. Already wiping programs, teaching, debate, and protest. Anything that goes against the MAGA program of white supremacy, patriarchy, and xenophobia, making itself even more susceptible to further attacks from the Trump regime. I find your point about the intentional targeting of those who people are willing to accept their targeting, and doing that intentionally is very important to recognize as well. I think that people have rightly, I think, you brought up the Martin Niemöller quote, the first they came for the communist quote. And I was wondering what you think it will take to shift to a situation where people are saying, first they came for the Palestinian activist, and I said, no fucking way. Like, what do you think we need to do to shift the situation where there is a culture, a movement that's not allowing this to come to pass, because they know that this may be the first, but is certainly not the last. And we've already seen further similar moves to non-Palestinian activists.
That's a really tough, big question. I am at heart a cynic. That comes with the territory if you study fascism for too long. Although I was a cynic before that. So frankly, I don't think that most people will see it until it's too late. That's my opinion. I think that many activists are having their eyes open now. I think that when Donald Trump goes after the major nonprofit organizations, which he is certainly gearing up to do, some people will take notice then, but I doubt that most people will notice or care for some time. That means that it is the job of leftists, progressives, centrists who believe in liberal democracy, and conservatives who believe in liberal democracy, people who actually are paying attention to these things. It's their job to project this into the future. We've been saying never again since 1945. Here it is. That's right now.
The most likely thing is that people continue to accommodate, to conciliate. That's the most likely, and yet it's not the only possibility. We are guaranteed the atrocities that this regime promises unless we attempt to defeat them. And I think that that's, to me, worth throwing down everything for. If there's a chance to knock this off the tracks, I think that it's worth everything for people in this country that are targeted, and people, around the world. And I think that, as you were saying, it's our responsibility to say, well, if you are saying never again, what does that mean for what time it is now? As we start to close out the conversation, what do you see right now as the biggest obstacle in people taking an active role in refusing fascism?
Or the biggest obstacle, not to repeat myself, but I would say that the biggest obstacle is the lack of organization. And again, by organization, I don't mean necessarily joining a political party. I don't necessarily mean joining DSA. I don't necessarily mean joining the Democrats or showing up to a protest organized by your local Planned Parenthood. All of those things are part of this, but if that's not your jam, do something else. The point is that I know a lot of people, and I, like many people, do this also. You get indignant, you get scared, you get tired, and the fact is that we don't have time to be tired. We have to keep going. If not you, who? That's essentially the position here. Working alone is tiresome. It's exhausting. It's demoralizing. The biggest obstacle is how many people think to themselves, how can I fight fascism in my everyday life? There are a lot of important ways to do it, but our everyday lives are about to change in ways that many people in the United States are totally unfamiliar with, especially the more privileged white people in the United States. People in the United States, again, especially privileged people, are about to experience a transformation in their everyday life, especially their everyday political life, their everyday economic life, that they only read about in history books if they were paying attention in class. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are just going to need to see it to believe it. They're going to need to feel it to believe it. And when they do, there has to be groups, events, organizations, networks that they can plug into, that they can jump into. If you're listening to this podcast now, that's your job to make it happen.
Thank you so much. And I think that your message of what the obstacle is also a source of hope and what we can do. Our responsibility isn't just something to see with dread or overwhelm, but our responsibility can be a source of determination, where we get our courage, where we get our willingness to make the necessary sacrifices for this greater good of defeating this fascism. And I think that your point of consistently coming back to seeing ourselves and each other as vital agents, I think is really important, and is I hate the word empowering, but I can't think of a better word to use. So I'm going to use that. Can be empowering in a moment where it can be hard to see our collective power until we're waging it together. So I wanted to express appreciation for that. I want to make sure that we know how to get your book and connect with your work. And if there was anything else that we didn't talk about that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, thank you so much. My book can be found. You can go to your local bookstore and request that they order it. It's called How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism. It's also available on the Routledge website. If you just type into your favorite search engine, How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism, Craig Johnson, it'll come up. It's coming out with Routledge Press, so you could order it from Routledge. You could talk to your local library and ask them to buy a copy to have there. Libraries, especially in countries that have lending libraries like the United States, will often do this. If you are part of a parenting group and you want to read the book and have me talk to you, let me know. You can reach me at howtotalktoyoursonaboutfascism@gmail.com. My podcast, 15 Minutes of Fascism, is up on wherever it is you listen to podcasts. And I have a Blue Sky at CA Johnson-Craig on Blue Sky.
That's wonderful, Craig. Thank you so much. We will be sure to link to all those things so that people can read your book, listen to the podcast, and connect more with you and your work in the spirit of talking to sons and everyone else about fascism in order to defeat it. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspective, your expertise with us.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to be here. I wish we were talking about something more fun, but here we are.
Yeah. And if they're listening, they know that this is a fun state. To continuing being not fun, we want to close out, but I want to encourage folks to really think about who the people in your life you can go and talk to tomorrow. No, we're not going to solve this by each one reach one, but I think that there is an import to having these conversations. I think that there's tools in Craig's book, and then there's the tool on the Refuse Fascism's website. It's our call to conscience, a call to act. That can be another tool to reach people. It's not geared necessarily towards speaking to your children, but it is geared towards speaking broadly to people about what it's going to take to end this nightmare. I want to thank you again, Craig, for joining me. I look forward to future conversations and finding more ways to work together. This was fun as talking about fascism can be.
Thank you so much. That's right. That's right. Have a lovely week. Thank you.
No, this show, Stopping Fascism, is no laughing matter. But I do have to say that there is so much joy to be had in fighting to end this nightmare. It is so much more fun to be saying fuck you to the regime and mobilizing to stop it, to drive it from power, than it is to be paralyzed and demoralized, than it is to be accepting a fascist USA. Thanks for listening to Refuse Fascism. If you want to support the show, spread the imperative and support the show by getting merch, see the show notes to get shirts, to get sticker packs, and more. Join our Patreon community to fuel refusal of this fascist nightmare. Join today at patreon.com/refusefascism. Share the show with others. Rate and review on Apple Podcasts wherever you listen, or comment on our socials or YouTube. It makes a difference and is so appreciated. And of course, connect with us on social media at Refuse Fascism, including on Blue Sky. Find me on TikTok at Sam Goldman RF. If you want to join efforts of Refuse Fascism, the movement, be sure to join protests this upcoming Thursday, March 27th, demanding free Mahmoud Khalil. You can find more information in the show notes and at refusefascism.org. Also want to put in a plug for the comedian Cliff Cash, who has been organizing protests at Heritage Foundation, at media that has been complicit, and he is organizing protests on March 30th. It's a media march. Ignore us when you're at front door, demanding that the media tell the truth on this fascist regime. We have linked to his social post where you can find protests that you can join. There at noon on March 30th. It's a mass media march. So those are two actions that you can take this week. We also hope that you'll connect with a Refuse Fascism chapter near you and the movement. You can sign up to volunteer with Refuse Fascism, refusefascism.org/volunteer2025. And that will connect you with ways to get involved, whether you want to get involved in local organizing in your community or national organizing. You can let us know your strengths, talents, and interests and get involved that way. If you want to help with the podcast, we would love to have volunteers for that as well. So please just put podcast in the other comment when you sign up. As always, thanks to Richie Marini, Lena Thorne, and Marc Tinkelman for helping produce this episode. Thanks to incredible volunteers, we have transcripts available for each show, so be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox. Transcripts are an area of volunteer need, so if you want to help with those, let us know. Until next Sunday, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.